Hey guys, and welcome to the Pacing Racing Podcast, the Canadian triathlon podcast made in mind for the age group triathletes. Now, in today's podcast, meet me with American Pro Triathlete Ben Hoffman. So, Ben recently just finished racing the IRONMAN World Championships with a fourth place finish and only 48 seconds down from Sebastian Kienle in third place. And with just a few short weeks after that, he toed the line at IRONMAN Florida, claiming a second place. And previously, Ben claimed the top step at the podium at the IRONMAN South African Championships, making it his third win on that course. And he just has an incredible list of accolades, including being an Ironman champion 7 times, with a fourth place at the IRONMAN World Championships in 2019 and 2016, and a second place at the IRONMAN World Championships in 2014. And just being a multiple Ironman 70.3 champion, Ben just has so much history and has accomplished so much in his career so far. And what I love most about Ben's story is the ability for so many people to relate to it. Now, Ben and his wife, Kelsey, recently welcomed a new life into the world in September, their daughter, Josephine. So, throughout the daily focus and work involved in being a parent to a newborn, Ben was still able to stay focused and determined to produce some amazing performances, which is truly inspirational. So, in this episode, Ben goes over his racing plans and schedule and gives us some great insight on balancing training with family life, overcoming injuries, sharpening your competitive mindset, nutrition tips, and so many more things. So guys, Ben also gives us great age group training advice and leaves us with plenty of motivation. So I'm personally a big fan of Ben and what he's done in triathlon. So the honor's all mine in today's podcast, and I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Now, let's cue the music. Today's show is brought to you by 2 sponsors. The first one is Brown Sports Bike Shop located in Toronto, Ontario. So I've always wanted to partner up alongside a local bike shop, but I was reluctant to commit because I never found a bike shop that encompassed everything I wanted in a shop until I met JP from Brown Sports. When you want to help represent a bike shop, you want to know that you can be absolutely sure you can refer your friends and family and listeners to them and know they're being taken care of in the best hands and getting the best prices. The team at Brown Sports are super knowledgeable when it comes to proper bike selection and bike fitting. In fact, JP is a Retool and IBFI Level 2 certified fitter and will go above and beyond helping you select the right bike for you and go to great lengths in making sure you leave the best bike fit possible. And they have a huge selection of bikes, including an incredible lineup from Quintana Roo bikes. And they're also the only company in Canada to offer up the 51 Speed Shop products. So it's really an all-in-one shop. So it's not just a bike shop, though. They also have a ton of great nutritional products, swim gear, and running gear. So if you're needing to add something to your triathlon repertoire, then there's a good chance they have it. And I'm currently working with JP now to get my bike fit dialed in, as last season I realized I was losing some valuable wattage and coming off the bike way more fatigued than I had to be because my positioning was way off. So I'll be doing a video of the fitting process when it's all done. So if you want to see that, then be sure to sign up to the Pacing Racing YouTube channel to be first notified when that comes out. And alongside carrying some of the best triathlon and road bike selections, Brown Sports also has a demo room for all the best indoor bike trainers, including the TAC series, the Wahoo series, and even the latest 4i Flight trainer. So if you're in the market for a new bike trainer, then they are also the experts in that area, and they'll help you set up the proper trainer and get you a good price. So if you want to go check them out in person, you can find them at 2447 Bloor Street West in Toronto at the Jane and Bloor intersection, or of course, you can also check them out and see their full inventory and list of services online at brownsports.com. And lastly, you can follow them on Instagram or Facebook by searching Brown Sports. So the second sponsor of today's show is Soul Fitness Canada, who is a premier global name in the fitness industry and has become one of the fastest growing fitness brands across the US and Canada. And as you all know, we're officially in the winter months, which means everything you build up now in training will be paying dividends in your race season next summer. With a few of my big races on the horizon next summer, including the 70.3 Chattanooga and the Day Tab Challenge Roth, I'll be ramping up the volume in running, which requires a treadmill that I can put kilometers into worry-free. And with tons and tons of research, I found a brand that I could stand behind for value, their quality, and their service, and I'm excited to say I ended up getting the Soul Fitness TT8 treadmill. So if you want to see my full review video on this, then head to my YouTube channel by searching Pacing and Racing, where I do full detailed outline of how this treadmill works, where I have it set up, and all that kind of fun stuff. But to briefly touch on the treadmill I went with, it's a 4 horsepower motor with 15 levels of incline and 6 levels of decline with speeds up to 12 miles per hour. It has heart rate monitoring with both the pulse grips and chest strap options, and the TT8 features a large running surface, 22-inch by 60-inch, which is awesome, and it has handlebar-mounted speed incline buttons, onboard speakers, cooling fan, and so much more. So these are all huge, important factors for me when I went looking for a treadmill. And Another thing that might resonate with listeners, it's not just about the winter training. In fact, I have a 2-year-old who happens to love her nap time. So I love the idea I'm able to go for a long run on the treadmill while she sleeps. And I think that's a great way to have effective time management for any time crunch triathletes out there. So if you guys are in the market for treadmills, indoor bikes, rowers, or ellipticals for your pain cave, then head to soulfitness.ca/pacing and racing. And again, Soul is spelled SOLE. Now, Soul Fitness is providing Pace Racing listeners a free equipment mat with any cardio equipment purchase from their website, which is a $50 value. So thanks so much to them. And all you need to do to claim this is type pacing and racing during checkout. Now, enjoy the podcast. So Ben, welcome to the Pace Racing Podcast, man. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for taking the time on the show. I appreciate it. And I can imagine you don't get a ton of downtime. Between all the racing you've been doing, the traveling, and of course, being a family man, right?
Yeah, things have changed recently for me. We have a brand new baby daughter. She's just over 9 weeks old now. So yeah, there's another piece on the plate now, but it's all really good stuff. And, as much as I thought I would have a little more downtime recently, it's actually been kind of busy between that and then a couple sponsor obligations, and we're headed back to the Midwest for Thanksgiving. So they just kind of seem to pile up, but it's a little different kind of stress, and it's all really, really good stuff.
Right. That's true. And you know what? It's funny, from all the triathletes I've talked to that are professionals, it's, you guys have busy schedules and kind of all over the place as is, right? And then now throw in a newborn into the picture too. And I can imagine it would be quite a handful of times, right? But like you said, it's a good kind of stress. It's new stress for sure.
It is. Yeah. And it really is the best kind of thing. I had a feeling and had heard stories from other people that, obviously having a child is something special that you just can't really exactly explain in words, and unless you've done it and experienced it yourself. And I found that to be true. It's really one of the coolest things. And, we're only, a handful of weeks into this new experience. And I will say this too, as a small aside, or a big one actually, that my wife is totally awesome. And, my stress is probably nothing compared to hers. She's definitely the point person right now, and the one that Josie wants to spend the most time with. So she's really stepped up to the plate, and she's an awesome mom, and she's carrying the majority of the load right now. I mostly just get the good times with her. And, it's kind of a lot of diaper changes and stuff like that. But when it's your own kid, you don't really mind.
Yeah, no, that's exactly true. Right? No, that's awesome, man. That's good to hear. And like, there's so much I'd like to chat about today. But before we dive into all that kind of stuff, I guess let's start back at the beginning here. Like, when did you first get into triathlon, and I guess what made you get into endurance sports to begin with?
That's a great question, and we have to go back a ways to get to that one. I guess to answer the second question, it probably is more appropriate, which is more like endurance sport. When I got into that, I did run high school track for 2 years. My freshman and sophomore year, I was an 800-meter runner, and I was a soccer player, basketball player. I did a couple other sports as well when I was growing up. And I was kind of always the kid on the team that could run forever. I wasn't necessarily the fastest or the most explosive or whatever it was, but I definitely had the endurance. And I think, we do step tests and things like that in soccer, and I could always last longer than everyone. So I had a sense that I had that kind of knack for endurance. But, then in high school, I got into some bike touring with my parents. So we would do these week-long tours in Colorado. They were supported. So, I'm not going to paint a picture of it being more burly than it was, but, we definitely got into some road cycling there. And that kind of led to opening the door for me, from an equipment standpoint, especially to exploring triathlon when I got to college at the University of Montana in Missoula. And that was the fall of 2003 when I first kind of linked up with the club program there. University had a club team that was actually quite good, and decided to go to a meeting, met a few of the guys, went to a few of the team practices, trainings. And at that point I had no swimming background, so that was kind of a shock to the system. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed kind of the discipline of it and getting back to that, deep level of fitness that I really hadn't experienced since I had ran in high school. And that was kind of the start of everything. So first race was spring of 2004, and realized I had a bit of a knack for it. and then went professional in 2007.
Oh, wow. So 2007. So I guess when you look at 2007, like what was it about that turning point there, or who was it maybe that led you into the idea that you could commit to it full time and go pro?
So there is a little bit of a backstory there that I kind of left out, which is that I raced for the university team. In 2006, I was the collegiate national champion on the individual side. Our team also won the title. And this was before it became an NCAA sport like it is for women now. And, we were just a club sport. So, a little different than like winning a national title, track and field or something like that, NCAA. Right. But, it was still, it was pretty cool. And we were pretty proud of that. But after doing that, I graduated in 2006 from the university. And what actually happened was I decided that I wanted to do this Summer of Glory, we called it, which was at the time my coach basically borrowed a Suburban from my parents, and we drove around the Pacific Northwest and raced every weekend trying to win prize money. At the time, and it may still be true, you could race for money in Canada whether you're a professional or not. I know in the US, and I think that's still true, that you have to actually carry an elite/professional license in order to race for that prize money. But at the time, you could race for that regardless in Canada. So we went up there and raced basically every weekend, camped out during the week, trained, and then did a bunch of racing. And I think I won, I want to say just over $3,000 that summer. And so naturally I was like, okay, I've got this, that's, clearly I'm doing great at this. So $3,000. And I decided that I really didn't want, to do anything else at the time. I wasn't really ready to do kind of a normal job. So I moved back to Colorado, and, I found a part-time job. I worked 3 days a week at a health department, and I just trained the rest of the time and kept chipping away at things. I would say it wasn't until 2010 that I kind of broke through a little bit and realized that I could actually make a living at it.
Wow. That's so crazy. I'm always fascinated to hear how everything kind of unfolded, because there was that time where you grew up just playing soccer and you knew you had the endurance background, but you kind of never expected, like, I know a lot of people grow up living and breathing triathlon, right, from their family or what have you. So it's just kind of cool how you fell into it. And then the story of going pro, that's pretty fascinating. And so as we flash forward here to today and we see how far you've come since making that transition to triathlon full time, I wanted to dive into the 2019 season a little bit more, because you kept very busy with racing this year and had some really great performances, like the South African IRONMAN Championships, which you won, and the second place in Florida, and just recently the fourth place in Kona. And it was only 48 seconds back from third. So, looking back, how did you feel about the season overall?
Yeah, I have to say that I really think that 2019 was one of my best years, and I guess I look at that not just from a finishing standpoint in terms of like a number result, like first, second, third, fourth, whatever it is, but just from a performance standpoint overall, the way that I executed races and the times that I posted, I think were easily some of my best ever. Especially if you look at a race like Kona, where, I never dreamed that I'd be going close to 8 hours, and I went 8:02 something this year. And, I was in the mix again, which was huge. And then of course going 7:48 in Florida, which I haven't really jumped on this yet, but I may start promoting it a little bit more. As far as I know, it's the fastest American Ironman time of all time. There was sort of an asterisk next to Matt Hansen's performance from Texas, which I think everyone acknowledged was not really the full distance. But, according to my files from Florida, the bike and the run were both legit distances. So, so 7:48, I think, is the fastest, full distance Ironman for an American ever, which is pretty cool. And also the same thing for the marathon, where, it ranks as, depending on who you ask, the fastest Ironman marathon of all time, actually. So that's pretty exciting. And I think it speaks to the fact that I'm improving as an athlete. And, that's something I think we're all sort of after as professionals, where you get a little discouraged maybe sometimes when you feel like you're not progressing. But for me as a 36-year-old to be hitting some of my best times ever, I think it's a really exciting time where I have a lot of hope and excitement about the future. And especially coming off of last year with some injury, it was really big to kind of, not just come back to where I was, but actually take a step forward. For sure. And now, I guess I can imagine here, on top of that rigorous training and competing schedule you had this year, and as we just mentioned, you guys just had your baby daughter in September, I believe, correct? Yeah. I mean, it seems like a total whirlwind actually looking back at it now. And
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, I can barely believe that we pulled it off. I mean, I think that when I came home in January from one of my runs, it was actually one of my first runs back after taking a significant time off with a sacral stress fracture. I came back on January 7th from a run, and I came in the door and Kelsey's like, I've got some news. And I was like, okay. And she's like, I'm pregnant. And I'm like, oh my God, like, of course I'm totally excited. Like that was something we wanted and we're trying to do. And, but then we kind of did the math and we were like, oh, that's like September, like that's probably going to be interesting. And, and I had seen it go kind of both ways, I guess. I mean, I remember Tio and Rainey had their baby, and I think Tio didn't have his best performance kind of shortly after. They had a little Izzy on August 22nd, which is my birthday as well. I saw Tio just didn't have a great day out in Kona following that. So I was kind of like, man, I hope that doesn't happen for me. I'm going to try to do everything I can to execute a great race out there and not have it be, kind of like a crutch or something that I say, oh, I didn't perform because of this. And I will say in the end, largely due to the fact that we have incredible familial support and the fact that Kelsey's totally awesome, we managed to really navigate it well. And I actually feel like I fed off of it and got a lot of energy out of it, as opposed to having it be something that, was a distraction or something that kind of held me back. I did feel like there were days when I didn't really want to go and do quite the same distance maybe on the bike because I was so eager to get home and see her.
Right.
But, besides those those small things, I really felt like my training wasn't super interrupted and I was able to kind of get in everything I needed and show up to Kona in a great mental state.
Exactly, man. Yeah. So that's actually really cool to hear. And, I must give a big props to your wife, Kelsey, as well, because even just playing this podcast, right? Like I was connecting with her and we're trying to organize a good schedule with it. And I was like, oh, wow, like she's probably got her hands full already. And then she's got me always emailing her. So it was pretty funny, but no, that's so props to her on that. But I mean, I love hearing this story too. And that your results were so successful in the racing too, because I think that strikes it can really resonate with a lot of listeners, right? I'm sure a lot of listeners are going through a similar situation with parenting and training and trying to juggle it all. And it struck a chord with me in particular as well, because my wife and I will be expecting our child in April of 2020.
Oh,
so yeah,
congratulations.
Thanks, man. And then just a few short months after that, I'll be competing in Challenge Roth. So, I mean,
oh, cool.
The fact that I see you kind of pull that off, I think that's pretty cool, right? So it's good to see that's possible and that it works so well for you guys. So that's good.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely do feel like, there's always a little bit of luck involved. And I think you're kidding yourself if you don't acknowledge that component in life. And there's no real shame in it. It's just kind of what it is, in my opinion. But yeah, I do feel like, we did everything we could to navigate it as well as possible. And, I do, like I said, kind of look back at it and be like, wow, I can't believe in some ways that we did manage it. But in the end, I mean, I just kept a really positive attitude and outlook about it. And, really just the excitement and the miracle of having a child was such a positive thing for me. I mean, when I needed the perspective, that certainly gave it to me.
For sure. No, absolutely. That's great. And now, I mean, just kind of, as we briefly mentioned Challenge Roth there, I mean, unfortunately, I guess you were injured near or in around Challenge Roth, right, in July. And now, have you ever competed at Challenge Roth before, or is this something that you might try and tackle again in the near future if the scheduling kind of permits, or how's that look for you?
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny that what happened last year, or this year rather, it feels like last year already. I raced South Africa, as you had mentioned earlier, and I won that race. And, there was quite a good field there. And I thought to myself, okay, I feel really good, actually. And I feel like I don't feel that beat up. I feel mentally energized still. I'm stoked to be back on the race course and to be performing at a high level. So one of the first things we did, like literally 2 or 3 days after the race in South Africa, while we were still on vacation down there, we were up at this little, animal game lodge outside of the mountains outside of Joburg. And, I sent an email to, Challenge family, and I was like, I really want to come. And I was late to the game, of course, but they, offered some support, which was great. And I said, okay, here we go. And then I started training when I got back from that trip. And, First I had a little hamstring niggle where I just kind of went for some strides on a run, and I kind of was like, oh, that didn't feel right. And that wasn't the main thing. What actually kind of held me back from racing Roth in the end was that I developed some plantar fasciitis for the first time in my life. And it's one of those things where, as my massage therapist says, he's like, when plantar is there, but you don't know when it's going away. And that kind of freaked me out a little bit because I haven't had to deal with it before. And it wasn't something that completely derailed my training, but it was really impacting my run. And I felt like, as I got closer and closer to Roth, I said, I have to be honest with myself and say that I don't see a pathway to getting the kind of training in that's going to allow me to be competitive here. And if I try to go all in on this, I feel like I'm going to make the injury worse. And then I'm going to compromise my potential, of my ability for Kona. And I do feel like after last year being injured, I'm definitely erring on the cautious side now. And, I just kind of realized that it wasn't the smartest path, basically. And, now I look at it and think that was probably a great choice to pull the plug on it. But to kind of revisit the second part of your question, definitely one of my motivations for racing Florida was to qualify early so I would open the schedule and allow myself the possibility, to explore a race like Roth. And we're absolutely looking at it right now and just trying to build, the rest of the schedule and see how those pieces come together. But I would say it's a front runner for a race that I would like to do in 2020.
Awesome. Well, that's good to hear. I always get excited if that's always a possibility for another athlete, especially if that's the year that I'm going down. So that's cool. It's exciting stuff, man. And I mean, as you briefly mentioned about injury there, that's a common thing I like to talk about with athletes too. I guess what would be some, whether it's injury mitigation or injury prevention tips, I guess, that you'd be able to provide for the age groupers out there? Because I'm sure there's a lot of go-getters who might either be struggling with an injury or maybe a bit eager to get back early into training. And I guess, how do you know as a pro athlete to kind of pull back when you might want to get out in training, but knowing that you still need to, get a little bit better before you get it back out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the short answer actually is that you don't always know. And I can rewind to my injury last year, in 2018, leading into Ironman Hawaii, where I had suffered a bit of a setback in Cape Epic, deciding to do that mountain bike race earlier in the year. And it kind of lingered for a while, but I did feel like I had recovered and got healthy. I did a couple 70.3s in the fall. And I felt like I was on track for Kona. I was in Tucson training hard. I felt really fit, and I went out for, a double hard run that I do with some regularity leading into an Ironman. And I was on the second run of the day, and I just kind of felt like I finished the run. Everything went really well. I got in the car and I was like, man, my glutes are just kind of like tight and sore. It didn't feel right. And then about 3 days later, I was doing a longer brick on the weekend, and I was kind of trying to find the gravel on the side of the path and just find the soft surface because something didn't feel right. And I got home and, I knew something was really not right, and I was in a lot of pain, and, steps around the house hurt. And I was kind of like, wow, this is a problem. And this was, sometime in September, I think mid-September. And to be honest with you, I really didn't see that coming. I mean, I felt like I was fit, everything was on track, but in hindsight, when I really dissect it, I realized that probably I was pushing a little bit too hard from that point out from the race, and maybe had injected a little bit too much intensity from too far out. But the truth is, you don't always know. But I will say, once you are injured, that erring on the side of, caution and being extremely conservative is definitely what I would say is, the safe bet for people out there. And that sounds obvious, but we're programmed to be, these people were obviously really into training all the time. It's a big part of our life. And, it's something that brings us not just physical, fitness, but also mental fitness. And so when you abandon that, or when you are forced to not do it, there's a lot of changes that go on inside your brain chemically, I think, that are really difficult to deal with. And so, the tendency is to want to rush back out there. And, what I learned was, every once in a while, a really hard reset of like 8 to 10 weeks where you're literally doing nothing can pay massive dividends, as evidenced by my season this year. But I think the big thing is making sure you're eating a really good diet. I learned about a couple of deficiencies that I had. And I do think that getting sleep every night to recover from both the emotional and physical stress that you put yourself through every day is extremely important. And I know as people age, that can be something that's tough sometimes, but prioritizing good quality rest every night can really, help you overcome a lot of obstacles.
Awesome. And yeah, I think those are all really great tips, right? Like, as you kind of mentioned there, triathletes in general, they tend to, it's a hard thing to not push yourself in training because, yeah, you get that inherent drive to always want to improve yourself and do better. And you naturally think the best way of doing that is to train harder, right? So it's always a constant battle for a lot of athletes out there to remember to, take those easy days and take those rest days when you can. And I definitely think you hit it spot on there with nutrition and adequate sleep. And yeah, I think that's perfect, man. And I mean, as you mentioned, taking that little downtime and how it resulted in this year's racing for you. Like we look at Kona and how well you did this season. No, I guess let's talk about Kona a little bit more about this year. Anyway, like how'd you feel the race went from your perspective? Any kind of things that were different compared to other years that you felt?
Well, I mean, I had been out of it for, at that point, basically two full cycles. I mean, 2 years essentially after missing last year. So, I felt, it did feel, it felt really familiar to me. I think that was maybe my 9th time racing it. But on the other hand, it felt like, I hadn't been there for a while. And, I was certainly nervous about what the dynamic might be like if the sport had sort of moved beyond me potentially or something in my time away. But yeah, I will say this. I do think, to answer your question specifically, the part that did surprise me was that this year, the thing that everyone's talked about for so long, which is that a swim break would stay away, actually happened. And historically, you see a couple guys maybe break away in the swim, but usually they get swallowed up on the bike. And this year, it obviously stuck, and that ended up being kind of a pretty decisive thing for the overall victory, of course, and for second place. Not that Tio was off the bike with Jan, but, he was quite close. And obviously that was kind of an important move that I was surprised to see that stick for the entire ride. And then, yeah, I think, the rest of it wasn't too surprising to me. I think you see kind of similar things every year where the run really is kind of the critical element for the most part. I mean, Jan was miles ahead, but he also did run the fastest run of the day to kind of cement his victory. And then, of course, I came from somewhere in the teens. I don't even know. I've heard 14. I've heard 18. I didn't even really look off the bike to 4th place at the end with the second fastest run. So, yeah, I feel like that part of it is not a big surprise to me. And I think it's something that you'll still see in the future. Of course, I would have liked to ride a little bit better, and that'll be something that I'll be chipping away at, as I move forward. But yeah, I mean, it was a pretty standard Kona overall. I will say that Jan's performance was probably the best Ironman performance that I've ever been somewhere near on race day, and was massively impressive. And I think he spoke to that after the race as well, kind of acknowledging that that's the day that you look for as an athlete, and you just had it. So yeah, I mean, a little bit disheartening in a way, discouraging maybe, but also, really impressive to witness it. And, the thing about Kona that's beautiful is that I do think that everyone has an opportunity before the cannon fires. It is kind of the great equalizer. And even if somebody seems like they're on a different planet like Jan, I think there's always possibility. And I still believe that I can win the race.
Absolutely, man. No, that's great. And a great way of summing that race up too, right? There's a lot of incredible, results that day. And it was a pretty good race by everyone across the board. So that top 5 pack there, it was definitely special to watch. And yeah, as you mentioned there briefly, like you passed a lot of people going into that run. And that's always a question like to ask, like when it comes to training, and I look at this from an age group perspective, and let's use myself going to Challenge Roth, an example. If you're wanting to improve yourself as an age grouper in the run, are you focusing more on, just hard efforts in run training, or are you focusing on improving yourself to be more incredibly fit in the swim and bike so that you have fresher legs in the run? Or kind of what's your take on that? Because you seem to have that down to quite a science.
Yeah, I mean, to answer it, the best way I can, I think probably more actually of the second part of that. I do feel like if you looked at my run training, it would probably seem maybe underwhelming considering my run performances that I've done. But I spend a lot of time on my bike, and I'm very consistent with my swim training as well. And I think that, the fitter you can get on the swim and bike, obviously the more efficient and the less energy you're going to use, which sets you up really well for the marathon. And at the end of the day, Ironman is primarily an energy management game. Mm-hmm. And what I find is that people, especially age group athletes, amateur athletes, and really a massive amount of the professionals as well, tend to overbike. It's so common. And, I just think that people ride well above what they're really trained to do. And then they hope, for the best on the run. And it's unfortunate because, oftentimes people do really good run training and obviously are capable of much better run performances and overall times. But they just get caught up in the game of burning all their matches on the bike, and then they have nothing to show for it when the run comes around. So, this year I went into Kona with a very specific plan of proving to myself that I could back myself for that marathon and run something in the low 240s. And I was able to accomplish that. And not only was that important because it moved me up in the rankings, and I finished 4th place, but it was important because I think moving forward, that was a stepping stone towards potentially winning the race, because that's something you need to have in your back pocket on almost any year in order to be competitive in Kona. And I think a lot of the guys that were in the top 10, they're going to walk away, for another year kind of wondering, can I do that kind of performance? And, I don't have that question anymore. So I'm happy with the way I executed. And I guess that would be my advice to everyone out there, is to be truly honest with yourself and practice some patience and be a little bit more conservative on the bike so that you can actually run to your potential on the marathon.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's really solid advice. That's awesome to hear. And as we all know, Kona, of course, it's an incredibly challenging course due to the environment and its conditions. So when you look at your on-course nutrition strategy, does it change drastically from race to race for you, or do you have a pretty typical go-to strategy that works for most races?
Yeah. I think that it does vary for sure, to account for the fact that you're in a much hotter and more humid environment than a lot of other races. But in terms of the overall strategy, what I do is a liquid kind of diet throughout the day. And the only thing that varies really is small amounts in terms of calorie. And then also salt intake is a little bit different when I'm racing in that hotter condition. And then of course, you definitely end up taking on board more water because you're sweating more. But, for example, a race like Florida, it was a little bit cooler and I didn't have to hydrate as much. And my calories were a little bit lower, for basically the first half of the race. But yeah, once I was on the marathon, it was actually pretty similar. I also didn't have to take in as much salt there because I just wasn't sweating quite as much. So yeah, I would say overall, the thing that changes the most probably is the hydration element of it in terms of how much water and how much electrolyte I'm taking in. But the fueling side of things is pretty consistent from race to race.
Nice. Excellent. Yeah, I'm always curious to kind of hear that and how other athletes approach it. And is there any sort of blanket, basic, foundational advice for listeners as an age group when it comes to creating or starting an on-course nutrition strategy? Like I know you said there, it can change drastically depending on the race course and conditions, but are there certain key indicators that we're looking for?
Yeah, definitely. I would say there's certainly a couple of, basic points that I can give. I do think that if you haven't tried it, and this of course depends a lot on what you're, how hard you're racing essentially, or at what percentage of your capacity you're racing. So, if you look at what we're doing, it's somewhere in that, 80 to 90% range for most of the day. So, probably comes out to about 85% effort of what our max is for that 8-hour period. And, I have a pretty good idea of what I burn in that time from the time that I've spent in the lab, understanding where your threshold power is and also understanding, where your threshold heart rate is so that you can kind of dial in where that crossover point from fat burning to carb burning is. But as a very general rule, if you're decently well trained, I would say that you can look at fueling with 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight per hour. And that's kind of a good starting point to make sure that you're staying on top of and getting in as many calories as your body can probably process. If you're better trained and you have a clearer picture of that, you might find that you can get a little bit more in. I do find that that's true for myself. I'm on the higher side of that. I'm quite capable of putting in a decent number of calories on the bike per hour. But I would say that's a good starting point again with the liquid nutrition, if that's not something you've done before, because as you push harder and your heart rate's higher, obviously there's a lot of blood that moves away from your stomach. That makes the digestion process slow down and much harder for you to process solid foods. And then as another kind of key point that I would guide people towards is really look hard at your hydration strategy in terms of how much water you're putting in with those calories. Oftentimes you see people that are really dumping the calories in, whether that's gels or bars or a combination of both, but they're not putting in the kind of water that's required to make that solution dilute enough for their body to actually process efficiently. And at the end of the day, for endurance athletes that are going for 8 hours or 8 hours plus, you really want to have about a 6 to 8% carbohydrate solution. And that's pretty dilute when you think about it. So most of the time people aren't drinking enough water.
Awesome, man. That's great advice. And so I think a lot of people can learn from that and kind of just start there, right? And see what works for them, see what doesn't. But I think just getting that foundational information to begin with and then figuring out what works for them, I think is key. So that's excellent. And I was switching up a little bit because I wanted to talk a bit about training and racing with power meters. Now, when it comes to bike pacing in a race, do you tend to go off perceived exertion, or do you go by power ranges, or how does that all work for you?
It's a combination of both, and a lot of it depends on the dynamic of the race. For example, in Kona this year, there was a good portion of the race when I was alone on the bike. And, for the first part of the bike, when I was still with a group and, riding with some of the Uber bikers that passed us relatively early on, I was looking at my power meter and I was saying, okay, this is one of those moments where you have to make a decision about, what you think you're capable of and what you've trained to do, and also just racing. And I chose to follow what I had sort of trained for maybe one of the first times ever in Kona and, abandon the plan of trying to just stay with those guys who I assumed would make their way to the front. In the end, of course, they didn't make it up there, but I did spend a lot of time alone. Occasionally I was with some other people. I think I was with Andy Potts and Nils Framholt for a while as well. Also let those guys go for quite a while because I just felt like they were a little bit too surgy and maybe riding above what I thought was sustainable for me, knowing there was a marathon coming. So yeah, it definitely varied between the two. But when I'm on my own, especially, I'm really looking at the power meter and kind of dialing in on those numbers that I think I can hold. When you're in the race dynamic, when you're in a pack of guys, even evenly spaced at 10, 12 meters, maybe a little bit more of that RPE / not even paying attention to any of it and just racing. So I do think it's really important to have the ability to do both. And I do feel like, through the massive amount of training I've done, I can actually pretty accurately, guess the number that I'm sitting on, for a sustained effort, especially just because of, I can relate that RPE number to an actual power number pretty accurately without even looking at my power meter. So definitely an important thing, I think, for people to focus on. Data is important, numbers are great, but you also just have to be able to really be in tune with your body.
For sure. Yeah, that's awesome to hear. Yeah, I'm always very curious to hear how different athletes use on the bike, right? I know typically it sounds like perceived exertion is kind of the go-to method, but I know a lot of athletes, it sounds like yourself too, they do take into some consideration of the data that they see on a power meter. So that's always kind of good to see, but also, yeah, it's just a tool, right? So using the judgment and deciding where you want to go from there, I think that's important to know. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And I do think there's one other thing I would throw in there as another point is that, the danger sometimes of power meters can also be in the other direction, right? Where, okay, oftentimes you hear people talking about how they see a number that they think is too high, or, they are psyched out because they're not holding a number that they've trained to hold. And that ends up being a negative. But I think that sometimes staring at a power meter can be negative in the other sense too, where it's like, you're actually capable of more than you realize. And sometimes those breakthroughs happen in a race and you might not even be able to explain exactly why it happened. But sometimes that can hold you back, right? So like you might feel really, really good. And that could be a warning sign to maybe not go all in on it too sometimes, but sometimes you feel really good and you actually are able to hold, those numbers. So keeping that in mind as well, that oftentimes you're capable of more than you believe and understand.
Right. Awesome, man. That's good. And then do you use heart rate zones at all? Or it comes to your training at all, whether it's swim, bike, or run, or are you just basically power or perceived exertion?
No, heart rate is definitely a component. And, I'm a huge believer in the heart, telling you a tremendous amount of information, actually. I have a separate sponsor, the circuit core device that I use that tests my hemoglobin non-invasively. But there's kind of a few other components that I pay close attention to as well, which are, the pulse rate over, long periods of time, and then pulse rate variability. And that gives you a lot of information kind of about how you're recovering and how prepared you really are for the next training session the next day. And I find that those are pretty valuable for kind of putting real numbers to the way you feel. But no, I think the heart is is really important to pay attention to. And once again, as I kind of referenced earlier, I've spent enough time in the lab that I have a pretty clear understanding down to, the beat or two per minute of where my crossover point of fat burning and carbohydrate, metabolism is. So understanding those numbers is really critical as well for kind of maximizing your performance on an Ironman.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so that's actually really cool to hear. And for the listeners who haven't heard of this before, your circuit core, that is one of your sponsors. And can you kind of explain a little bit more in detail about what they do? Because you mentioned there, it's non-invasive patient monitoring, right? But can you explain to them who may not be aware of what they do?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. You basically have this device that clips onto your finger, and using light waves, it reads sort of your blood profile and gives you information. For example, your hemoglobin, which is, pretty next level. There's nobody else that's really doing that. And that can be important for a variety of reasons, but mainly the main reason why hemoglobin is important, as we all kind of know, or most of us know, is that it gives you an indication of how much oxygen you can carry in your body, which for endurance athletes is obviously really important. But in addition to the hemoglobin, which is kind of the key parameter that it monitors, you also have your pulse rate variability, you have your pleth variability index, you have your pulse rate, and you have oxygen saturation, oxygen content, and then a few others as well. So it kind of gives you a really comprehensive picture of your blood health, which ultimately is, extremely important for an athlete, but also just the everyday person as well. So it's something that I use, and the way that I use it primarily is a morning reading. So first of day when I'm laying in bed still, and then again at night when I'm laying in bed. And then I also apply it for resting periods throughout the day after workouts. And then occasionally immediately following a workout to get a reading. And a lot of what I'm looking for with that is the hemoglobin number, because it's giving me information about my hydration levels as well. If you have an extremely elevated hemoglobin level, it might mean that you're dehydrated. And that's why it's really important to take those, as reference points a couple times a day, just to make sure you're staying on top of hydration and other things that obviously can, help with recovery. I'm not sure how familiar people are, but there's pretty clear evidence that hydration is like one of the most important things when it comes to recovery each day. So, understanding when you're dehydrated is not just as simple as maybe checking the color of your urine. Having a little bit clearer picture of your blood profile is really helpful with that. So yeah, it's a pretty cool device. Definitely check it out if you're interested in having a little clearer picture of what's going on inside your body and putting some of those numbers to the way that you feel. So you have a little bit better and maybe more objective, outlook on your overall health.
For sure. No, I think that's really cool. I'll definitely, I'll find the link to their site after, and I'll put in the show notes, because I think that's really important to see. Right. And I know that can resonate with a lot of listeners, because just triathletes tend to be analytical type of people, right? Like we tend to love our data. So I think the more that you can stay in tune and focus on your health, and especially things with blood, like cardiovascular system for endurance athletes, I think is pretty important. So I think that's awesome to see, and that they can do things like that. So that's excellent. And I mean, now kind of looking at the swim component, we've been talking about bike and run quite a bit here. Now, of course, you happen to be, or actually, I guess you happen to own one of the master swim spas. Now, for those who haven't got to experience one of those before, what's it like? And do you tend to incorporate that into a lot of your training quite regularly for swimming?
Yeah, so that's a new sponsor of ours. And, we're quite fortunate to have a master spa down here in Tucson at our home. And basically, for those who aren't familiar, it's a swim spa, which, it's basically like it's not an in-ground pool. It's basically an above-ground pool that's side, I would say, for like a pool. But yeah, larger than a hot tub, of course. And the concept behind it is that you basically can do stationary swimming. So they're designed to create kind of like a swim treadmill experience. And I think it's really awesome. It's something that I do, incorporate quite regularly in my training. I do it I do it a variety of ways. I would say one of the cool parts about water is that I just find that it's like really awesome for recovery. Sometimes what I find the best thing to do after like a hard day of training, even though it seems a little counterintuitive, is to get in and do like a really light swim. Just some kind of active recovery and movement, can be really critical for recovery. It just kind of seems to keep the blood moving and repair the body a little bit more. You just walk out feeling better. But yeah, I mean, I definitely do hard swims in it. I do some of the masters group as well. So I go to the pool still. It's not something that I use for every swim session that I do. But the convenience factor is really awesome. I mean, we all know, especially a lot of age group triathletes that have families, that have full-time jobs, that, time is obviously one of the more valuable resources. So being able to just kind of jump out and get in a pool that's right in your backyard is awesome. And, get a workout in, whenever it is really. And then, I definitely think there's a recovery component as well, where you can just chill out and use the jets. And, if you want to, you can turn it up to like a hot tub temperature and just enjoy the relaxing component of it as well. So we're super pumped on it. And, the other small thing that I'll add is I think it's super beneficial because it also creates a continuous swimming experience. So for us that are training for open water races where you don't have, the ability to hang on a wall, it's really nice to kind of practice that continuous swimming. I mean, I've definitely had sessions that I've done in there that I put the timer on 15 minutes and it felt like it was a lot longer than that, because I think when you are getting really used to swimming in a pool, you kind of forget how long 15 minutes of continuous swimming can really feel like. So getting your head around that and just practicing not being able to stop and grab the wall is actually really good for building confidence for open water swimming.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's exactly it. It's funny you said that too about open water swimming, because it's quite different than the pool. So myself being here in Canada where it's snowy here, it's just natural. We're not going to be swimming outside. So we spend all of our time in the pools now. So when you get back out into this, late spring into summer, when you start going outdoors, and it's quite the shock. You got to get yourself used to the open water swimming. So things like that kind of make a big difference, right? The fact that you can make it almost warm like a hot tub, that's pretty impressive. So good stuff. Now, one of the things I want to ask you about training wise, I guess, was what's your overall take on coaching, I guess, for age groupers? Like, do you feel it's essential for all triathletes to have a coach if they want to perform their best, or are some of them able to get away with being self-coached? Because it's always that thing, that give take of can they afford it, and are they able to do it themselves, that sort of thing, right? So what's your kind of general take on that?
Yeah. And then of course the other component being like, do they feel like they're getting the value, for the money that they're spending if they do have a coach? And, it's not something that I can answer for every single person. I've gone through various phases in my career of being coached and being self-coached. And I think that a lot of it does depend on what your goals are, and also kind of what information you have and where you've been in the past. So if you've done, if you're 20 years into a triathlon career, I would say there's a decent chance that you have a good understanding and that you have seen a lot and experimented a lot. So, and you also, I will say, as kind of a, to preempt all of this, I do think that there's nobody that knows you as well as yourself, as long as you're being honest with yourself. So you do know a lot about yourself, and a lot of times, what you need, and you also, you just know your schedule and you're living it every day. So that can be one of the challenges, I think, sometimes for coaches, is that they're not living and understanding exactly what's going on in your day-to-day life. And it's difficult sometimes to communicate that to a coach. But yeah, overall, I find it really valuable now to have a coach. And of course, I'm quite happy with my coach. I'm coached by Ryan Bolton. He works with Bolton Endurance Sports Training. And, this has been about a 2.5-year relationship now. So relatively new overall, but, I think we're just kind of seeing the fruits of that sort of effort that we've put in now, especially on the run side, which is what he's known for. But to go back to your original question, I think it really does depend on the person. I think coaches can be extremely valuable, especially if they're being, really on it with their athletes, and they're sort of taking in the bigger picture of what's going on with their life stresses. It's not as simple as just, assigning swim, bike, and run workouts, but also understanding the dynamic of their life and the stresses that are coming from other places, and building that in, because those are quite real and can be, beneficial, but also detracting from the performance side when it comes to the athletic stuff. So yeah, it really just depends on the person, but especially people that are dialed in, I think it can be nothing but beneficial, and it provides a real sounding board. I still have a lot of input about my training schedule, but I also think that, yeah, it's really nice for me to just kind of hand that over a little bit and let Ryan determine what I need to be doing, and have trust in that process, and know that if I do what he says, for the most part, I'm going to show up ready to race at a high level. And I like the accountability as well. Not that I'm not already self-motivated and disciplined, intrinsically motivated, but yeah, I think it does help to have somebody else there who, holds me accountable to these workouts, because it does turn into a grind sometimes.
For sure. Yeah. I've noticed too, the accountability is really key for myself. One of the last questions I'll ask as far as age groupers go, and this one's kind of like a mindset question, whether it's for an age grouper's next long ride or their next run session, something like that, just a little bit of motivation. Like, what is your motivation you tap into, I guess, when you're digging deep in a training session, or whether it's you're struggling or hurting, say in like Kona, perfect example, at the second end of the run? Like, what's that spark that you look into and push past when you're hurting, I guess, on a race or in a long training session?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly changed recently, and I would say a big component of it now is that I feel like, I'm racing for more than just myself and Kelsey, obviously with Josephine, and I think that's a really cool motivator, and something where, it might sound a little corny, but like I want her to be proud of me. And I think, for me as an athlete who's dedicated my life to being a high level professional in the sport, one of the statements that I make, whether it's overt or not, is that I'm trying to perform at a high level and win races, right? So, the performance is a component. And I know you hear a lot of people say like, oh, well, your kid loves you regardless. And that's true. And that's liberating and awesome. But I also think, it's cool to think about like the fact that one of the components is like, you want to perform really well because that's what you're saying you're going to do. And, thinking about her, even though she probably won't know a lot of my racing. I mean, I'm 36 and I think I have another maybe 4 to 5 good years in front of me. I mean, she'll be old enough to maybe remember and understand at that point, but likely she won't be, witnessing a lot of my racing and remembering it. So
right.
Being able to tell those stories later, I think is a motivator of some kind. And then, what I really would say that's probably more applicable to everyone, is that what I like to think about a lot is that I kind of do what I would call like I guess it's sort of like basically a reframing of, the whole concept of like suffering and everything else that we kind of have this knee-jerk reaction of moving away from. And what I've gone and done now is realize that those are the moments that I really love, actually, when I'm honest with myself. They bring sort of the truth out of you and test you in a way that most life circumstances really don't. And so instead of kind of shying away from those now, I really look for them. I seek them out and embrace them when they're happening, because I know that even if I'm suffering in that moment, something positive is going to come out of it. Some kind of growth element is going to happen. And, that's really changed my entire approach now, where I appreciate a lot of those moments. And I think, if you're in the sport to begin with, it's probably because you have some goals and motivation and desire to achieve fitness or performance. Just keeping that on the front of your mind as why you're doing it. Your reasons why will kind of change, I think, your outlook in some of those moments where you just want to give up.
Dude, awesome, man. I love that. I love that advice. And I think a lot of people can definitely take that and learn a lot from that and help them restructure it and have a different mindset going into, their big training sessions or their racing when they need it most. So that's huge. And that's good, man. I think that wraps up all the questions I had as far as tips go. But I guess now moving into the 2020 season schedule, have you chosen all the races you'll be doing yet? And I guess what's your schedule kind of looking like as it unfolds?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's what now, November 19th or so right now. And, I feel like I'm still pretty freshly off of the year, having just raced on November 2nd in Florida. And, I opened up a lot of possibilities, as I mentioned, with that race. It means that I don't have to necessarily do another Ironman to qualify for the World Championships in Kona next fall, because I'm already done with that That doesn't mean that I won't race one, most likely, because I think that's the distance I most excel at and the one that I enjoy the most. And as I did touch on before, it certainly opens the possibility of racing in Roth over the summer in July. I think that's a real front runner for me. But, I also have the IRONMAN African Championship in Nelson Mandela Bay, which is on the 29th of March. And then I also have the, North American Championship in St. George, which I'm the, defending champion going back to 2012 when they had the last full distance race there. And that's on May 2nd. So those are both on my radar, as well as long course races that I'm interested in. And then going to Roth this summer, potentially. That is something that we've talked about doing and wanted to do last summer. We have friends in Sebastian Kienle and Tina, his wife. And, they've stayed with us here in Tucson before, and we've talked about going over there and spending a little bit of time with them as sort of a European tour. So, yeah, we're looking into a huge number of possibilities, both challenge and Ironman, half Ironman branded, races. But it's too soon to really answer those questions entirely. I have a visit with my coach in person here coming up soon, where we'll kind of sit down and chip away at a schedule, at least an ideal schedule for next year. But what I can say is that, I would say Roth is definitely a front runner. And then as well as St. George in South Africa. It's just a little bit more challenging to travel to South Africa with, what at that point will be, an 8-month-old child or so. So, we'll see. But lots of possibilities. And, I'm also hopeful that the Collins Cup, which is kind of the Ryder Cup of triathlon, will get off the ground this year. And that may be happening this summer somewhere, I think, potentially in Europe. So if that does happen, then I'll definitely be exploring that as a possibility in my race schedule as well, because that could be pretty exciting.
Yeah, there you go, man. That sounds like a pretty awesome season ahead, potentially, right? And you know what? If you do go to Roth and you stay with the Kienles, then maybe you get Sebastian to race as well. Then you can have a one-on-one with them there. So that'd be perfect. No, that's good, man.
I'm sure it'll be a pretty stacked field. I mean, you hear a lot of rumors, but I think from what I've heard, it's going to be quite a field there. And you might be seeing a lot of the top guys from Kona that are towing the line there. So could be a pretty exciting, race out there in Germany. And it would be fun to be part of it and maybe go for some records too. My confidence level is at an all-time high when it comes to the marathon. It's something that I really look forward to now in racing. So, I'm motivated by those kinds of things too, seeing just how fast I can go on the run and overall as well.
Perfect, man. Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. So that's great, man. I think that's a wrap. Obviously I could keep chatting away all day here, but I'm sure you got a busy rest of the day here planned. So we won't keep you any longer, but I guess before we wrap it up, are there any other sponsors you kind of like to go shout outs to quick?
Well, I would definitely like to, just quickly kind of run through a couple, I guess. Yeah. We made some changes this year. We're on Cervelo Cycles, which is awesome. Those guys are rad, and they made 3 new bikes this year, which are, one of them is not necessarily a triathlon bike, the P5 disc, but obviously they made the P3X and PX as well, which are new offerings. And then of course they have a whole lineup of bikes that go down across the range. And I think that's really cool that they're dedicated to the space and, providing a lot of new product for, triathletes out there. So we're super stoked to be with them. And I think, it's only been an aid in my performance, and we're really happy with that. And then of course you mentioned Master Spas. They're new to the team, which has been great. And we're still with Zoot. We were kind of the last man standing over there. We're the really only sponsored athlete at this point, but I've been with those guys forever, and they've always had my back, and they're awesome. They do custom kits for me, and they have an awesome wetsuit as well. And we're just super fortunate. So we have really good support, and we're actually working on some new exciting stuff for next year. So hopefully the next time I chat with you, I can talk about those new ones too. But I'm just really, really fortunate to be supported by an incredible group of people. And, they allow me to live this life that really is a dream life most of the time.
Awesome, man. No, that's perfect. That's always good to hear the good relationships with sponsors and athletes, because with those sponsors, right, like we wouldn't be able to see these performances like we do now, and with these athletes getting the support they do. So I think that's incredible, man. And you know what, man, that's wrap. Obviously, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it, and all the best, man. And I'll be watching you go into this next season here.
I really appreciate it, man. And not to make it awkward, but for the age group crowd that was listening out there, I also want to quickly inject, a little thank you for you as well, because I know that, for the professionals, we rely on you to support these companies. And, it's not something that I take for granted either. So whether or not you're supporting my sponsors or other professional athlete sponsors, I think it's appreciated across the board, and you guys are really the lifeblood of the sport. So thank you for that. And we'll look forward to seeing you out on course.
Perfect. There you go, man. Yeah, keeping the triathlon community alive. Love it, man. Awesome.
Yep.
All right, perfect. All the best, man. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Well, guys, there you have it. The man, the myth, the legend himself, Ben Hoffman. So thanks so much for listening, guys. I really hope you enjoyed that episode like I did. And that's a wrap. If you guys want to hear more podcasts like these, then hit that subscribe button. And you can follow me on Instagram at pacing.and.racing. And you can check me out on YouTube by searching Pacing and Racing. And lastly, if you did like this episode, please just take 2 minutes to leave a kind review on the podcast channel, as that helps us get heard by more listeners through the podcast platform algorithms. Anyways, thanks so much. We'll talk to you next time.